It was supposed to be routine. A training dive scheduled for early September 1982 in the southern basin of Lake Michigan. The weather was stable, the permits filed, and the team selected, 4 Navy-trained divers attached to a little-known civilian military liaison unit based out of Chicago. The mission, as publicly stated, was recovery training in deep water, testing submersion gear, sonar mapping, and high-pressure navigation in a lake known for its thermoclines and treacherous currents. But internal documents, unsealed decades later under the Freedom of Information Act, hint at something else entirely. The dive site was marked as Sector Echo 9, roughly 25 nautical miles off the coast near Saugatuck. Coordinates do exist, but they were redacted in every known government file. What remains is a hand-drawn map retrieved from the belongings of Lieutenant Commander Harold Greer, the team lead. A rough sketch shows a concentric ring of depths with a single bolded X at its center. The ring is labeled with one word, Chimera. Officially, the dive commenced at 0630 hours. The weather station at Muskegon recorded calm waters and light wind. The team launched from a black-painted civilian trawler, registry missing from Coast Guard logs but matching photographs from a now declassified NSA surveillance file dated a week prior. By 0700, the divers were submerged. Communications were logged normally for 26 minutes. Then, the radio went silent. It was not a standard blackout, not static, not interference. What followed, according to a heavily redacted memo from the Naval Oceanographic Office, was a non-random signal anomaly of unknown origin. The memo uses the phrase bioelectric feedback spike, though no further details were ever publicly released. Recordings from the surface vessel were pulled by military personnel within 48 hours, and transcripts never reached the public record. What we do have is an unsent letter recovered from the personal files of Ensign Leo Martinez, one of the missing divers. The letter is addressed to his sister and mentions something humming below us, like a machine breathing under the lake. It ends with an unfinished sentence. I saw something move in the... By 0735 hours, the crew topside issued a distress call. It was received by a nearby NOAA vessel, the Vanguard *, whose logbook states only interference field detected, visual distortion on lake surface. The words were underlined twice, and the log abruptly ends with a torn page. No follow-up entry. The Vanguard * returned to harbor 2 hours later with no further comment. To this day, its captain refuses all interviews. Over the next 48 hours, the search effort would become one of the most quietly extensive lake operations in modern U.S. history. No public alert was issued, no missing persons bulletin. Instead, naval sonar sweeps and aerial thermal scans were conducted under the pretext of deep current mapping. Civilian aircraft were rerouted. All local marina traffic was halted. Amateur radio recordings captured encrypted traffic using NATO brevity codes not in common use at the time. One of them, heard repeatedly on a ham band by an amateur in Kenosha, Wisconsin, said, "Echo 9 holds, keep it contained." No bodies were recovered. No dive gear. Not a single trace of the 4 divers or their equipment was ever officially acknowledged. But 4 weeks later, a fisherman near South Haven dragged up something from the lake bed. He never made a formal statement, but according to a 1984 article buried in the Kalamazoo Gazette, he reported the object to local authorities, only to be visited the next day by 2 men in gray suits with no names. The article quotes him as saying, "I didn't even tell them where it was, but they already knew." The story was retracted a day later, with the paper issuing a statement that the original report was fabricated and submitted without editorial oversight. The journalist who filed it, Margaret K. Stilwell, left the paper weeks after and moved to British Columbia. She has not responded to any inquiries about her time at the Gazette. Whatever the divers found, if they found anything, was never meant to be discovered. What remains is a silence so total it creates its own gravity, and a question that refuses to die even 40 years later. What exactly lies beneath Sector Echo 9? And why did 4 trained professionals vanish without trace in one of the most heavily surveyed freshwater bodies in North America? 2 weeks after the disappearance, a former Navy sonar technician named James Carraway came forward with a story that was quickly buried under a wave of discrediting articles and personal scandal. According to Carraway, he had been reassigned in late August 1982 to an unusual audio monitoring assignment based out of a temporary listening station in northern Indiana. The station, codenamed Silver Hook, was installed under the guise of tracking Soviet submarine activity, a bizarre claim considering the depth and isolation of Lake Michigan. Carraway's team was instructed to log every deviation in low-frequency acoustic activity between 0300 and 0900 hours daily, particularly focusing on a zone that overlapped precisely with the missing diver's last known coordinates. What Carraway remembered most was the recording from September 3rd, the day of the dive. He said it started with nothing more than the usual ambient wash of water and distant engine hum. Then something emerged, slow at first, rhythmic, like metal groaning under extreme pressure. But it wasn't the sound of failure. It pulsed, intentional, patterned. One of the analysts on site suggested it resembled a sonar ping, only reversed, as if the lake itself were scanning the surface. When Carraway played the loop backward, the pulses formed a slow, droning cadence. 3 tones, then 4, then silence. He made a copy. 3 days later, his superior was reassigned, the listening post dismantled, and Carraway was informed he'd been honorably discharged due to a sudden medical condition. He never served again. The copy of the recording, according to him, was stored in a locked safety deposit box in Gary, Indiana. In 1996, that bank burned down. The cause of the fire was declared faulty basement wiring. No one was injured. No safe deposit boxes were recovered. Meanwhile, a pattern began to emerge in local folklore. The Odawa and Potawatomi tribes had long told stories of something ancient and restless beneath the lake, something that had no face but many eyes. In the 1800s, fur trappers in the region reported boiling water with no thermal source and vanishing canoe parties. One account from 1887 described a fisherman who sank without struggle or splash, as if pulled by hooks. Historians dismissed these stories as metaphor or fear of undertow. But one anthropologist, Dr. Edwin Roussel, published a now-forgotten paper in 1969 linking Great Lakes legends with a common proto-mythology of deep dwellers and resonant ones. The paper concluded with a strange line: "Some lakes are not bodies of water, but bodies themselves." By early October, families of the missing divers were instructed not to speak to the press. Each was given a formal death certificate listing training accident equipment failure as cause of death. No remains, no caskets. One of the families, the Martineses, filed a request for further information under the Freedom of Information Act. The reply was a form letter. Their follow-up inquiry never received a response. Yet, whispers continued. That winter, a park ranger at Van Buren State Park reported strange readings on their handheld Geiger counter near the shoreline, registering brief bursts of radiation. The device was calibrated and rechecked multiple times. When a request was made to test the area, park management declined, citing budgetary constraints. The ranger resigned weeks later. In an anonymous forum post in 2003, Someone claiming to be that same ranger described a glow just under the ice and the unmistakable sound of metal dragging stone. Satellite images from that same winter, if you can find them, show an unusual circular melt pattern in the lake's ice, roughly matching Sector Echo 9's location. NASA dismissed the anomaly as a natural thermal pocket, but independent hydrologists argue that no known current or thermal vent in that region could produce a pattern so precise and symmetrical. In 1983, a man named Paul Henderson, who had worked in supply logistics for the Chicago-based Military Liaison Unit, was found dead in his apartment, an apparent suicide. The note found beside his body was brief and nearly illegible, smeared in places by what the coroner described as excessive perspiration. But 4 words were still readable. "We woke it up." The file was closed, his name scrubbed from most internal databases. But a single scanned payroll record from 1982, retrieved by an amateur archivist, places Henderson on the roster for the September 3rd dive operation as support, logistics, and containment. Whatever they found under Lake Michigan that day, it wasn't natural, and whatever happened to those men, it was never meant to be traced. The story, if it ever surfaces fully, is buried under layers of silence and time, layers as dark and cold as the lake that took them. 3 months after the disappearance, in December 1982, a curious report was filed by a private shipping vessel operating out of Milwaukee. The Caroline L. a bulk carrier en route to Chicago, was passing near the Echo 9 sector when the crew observed a sudden drop in sonar depth readings from 290 feet to zero in less than 3 seconds. The ship's second officer, Joseph Amundsen, logged the anomaly as a phantom shelf, but what disturbed him wasn't the glitch itself. It was the cold. The temperature sensors recorded a surface-level drop of 11 degrees Fahrenheit in under a minute. Frost appeared on the bridge windows, despite the lake not yet frozen for winter. The ship's engineer described it as like passing through a fog that came from below, not above. That log entry, once uploaded to the National Maritime Database, was quietly removed within 48 hours, but Amundsen, now retired, kept a photocopy. When interviewed in 1994 for an obscure cable documentary on Great Lakes disappearances, he held it up and tapped the word he had scribbled next to the sensor data in his own handwriting: artificial. His segment never aired. The production company behind the episode went bankrupt 6 months later, and no raw footage survives. Elsewhere, in early 1983, internal correspondence between branches of the Army Corps of Engineers and the Environmental Protection Agency reveals that a remote team was deployed to collect core samples from the lakebed near Sector Echo 9. Officially, the mission was framed as a sediment pollution study, but 2 things don't add up. First, the coordinates used in the EPA's mission outline were identical to those from the Navy dive. And second, the equipment list included gear typically used in geothermal drilling, not environmental surveying. The sample analysis was conducted at a facility in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. What little documentation remains includes a scanned cover page labeled Anomalous Silicate Findings, Unclassified Extract. The core sample, reportedly pulled from 312 feet below the surface, contained a non-banded silicate shell fragment with isotopic values that did not correspond to known mineral compositions in the Great Lakes Basin. More disturbingly, the report noted trace organic structures embedded within the material lattice, but included no conclusion. The fragment was then transferred to a private defense contractor in Virginia, Lakon Helix Systems, under a directive signed by a Department of Defense liaison whose name remains redacted in every known version of the transfer memo. According to a redacted briefing from Lacon Helix dated August 1983, the silicate exhibited unusual vibrational behavior when subjected to low-frequency resonance. In plain terms, the fragment responded to specific audio wavelengths by producing faint pulses of electromagnetic discharge. One notation, written in pen beside the lab notes, simply reads, "Try the 3-4 pattern." It's unclear what the result of that test was, as the rest of the page is torn away. Around the same time, strange sightings began to increase around the lake. Not lights in the sky or the usual monster in the deep stories, but more subtle disturbances. Boaters would report feeling momentarily disoriented, as if their sense of direction had been pulled in every direction at once. Several ferry passengers described hearing a foghorn that no one else heard, followed by what they could only call silence so thick it rang in their ears. In January, a tugboat captain out of Grand Haven claimed to have seen a black shimmer on the water, a patch of surface that didn't reflect light, even under full sun. When he approached it, his GPS and radio systems both cut out, returning only when he reversed course. That spring, the Michigan State Police received an anonymous envelope containing 2 photographs and a reel of undeveloped film. The photos showed what appeared to be a diver's boot and a piece of sonar equipment, both marked with naval inventory codes. The boot was half covered in a crystallized deposit resembling salt, though Lake Michigan has no salinity. One of the photos was stamped with the date SCP-0382. The letter that came with it, typed unsigned, simply read, "Tell their families the lake never wanted to give them back." The film reel was never publicly released. According to a FOIA-denied FBI case summary leaked in 2001, the footage included 4 frames that were deemed potentially anomalous, showing shapes moving below what looked like a fractured lake bed. Experts allegedly called them geological folds, but an unnamed analyst noted that one of the shadows turned against the current. Around this same period, several family members of the divers began reporting strange dreams. Shared elements surfaced, visions of staircases descending into water, hollow voices speaking in Morse code, and the sensation of immense pressure on the chest. These reports were never officially investigated, but one private psychiatrist working with the Martineses documented the case in a sealed report. He referred to the experience as secondary trauma by spatial echo, a term not found in any mainstream psychiatric literature before or since. He disappeared in 1987 during a hiking trip in the Upper Peninsula. His body was never found. His notes were discovered in a sealed envelope addressed to himself, marked, "To be opened only if I don't return." They contained sketches of circular stone chambers, annotated with notations in a language he claimed to have seen in dreams. Some of the symbols appear similar to Paleo-Hebrew and Linear A, but none match any known lexicon exactly. By mid-1983, it had become clear that something had changed in Lake Michigan, not on the surface, but beneath it. Fishermen began avoiding certain zones without knowing why. Divers quietly refused training in the Echo 9 vicinity, and 2 NOAA researchers transferred out of their posts without explanation after a failed sonar array dropped in the region returned impossible data, according to one of the few leaked memos available. That phrase appears multiple times in the document, always in quotation marks, as if the words themselves carried weight they couldn't otherwise explain. Yet still, no public statement was ever made. No formal investigation opened. No monument for the lost divers. Only a quiet tightening of access to certain waters, a rise in permits denied, and a lingering sense among those who knew better that whatever sleeps at the bottom of Lake Michigan wasn't sleeping anymore. The summer of 1983 brought a brief reprieve in sightings and anomalies, at least publicly. On paper, Echo 9 was quiet. Sonar sweeps returned clean. Weather patterns were normal. But within specific federal departments, something far less reassuring was taking place. The Defense Intelligence Agency opened a compartmentalized file labeled Project Neptune Red. Most of the contents remain classified to this day, but one partial transmission from a debriefing summary has surfaced in fragments, scattered across 3 separate leaks. Pieced together, they tell of an inland aquatic structure, unmapped, non-metallic, hollow. Not a wreck, not a cavern. A formation with symmetrical internal chambers and curved walls, shaped not by erosion, but by design. That summer, a deep submergence vehicle, DSV 4* Sea Nymph, was deployed under the guise of joint sonar calibration with Canadian research partners. The craft, capable of descending to 3,000 feet, was recorded as being in the Gulf of Mexico. But internal maintenance logs from the Port of Ludington show repairs to its left manipulator claw, noted as crushed under sudden pressure during an unauthorized descent. The technician who wrote that note later disappeared while traveling to meet a journalist in Ann Arbor. His name was Thomas Eklund. His car was found parked outside the station, still running, with a stack of documents sealed in plastic on the passenger seat. The documents were never recovered. The official story: he suffered a psychotic break and wandered into the woods. A local boy later claimed to have seen a man walking straight into the lake at dawn, like he belonged there. During this period, several radio hobbyists on the southern lakefront began reporting strange bursts on VLF frequencies, ultra-low ranges typically used for deep-sea communication with submarines. The signals had no call sign, no origin, but cycled through a repeating 4-note pattern. A field musician and cryptographer named Carla Petrescu converted the signal to audio and analyzed the waveform. What she found was unsettling. The signal formed an irregular pulse, resembling a human heartbeat, except the tempo was far too slow. When amplified and looped, the sound created what she described as a low voice exhaling through stone. Petrescu vanished in 1984 during a solo kayaking trip. Her last recorded transmission, made via VHF, was a single phrase: "It's under me." The kayak was recovered a week later, wedged into a marsh some 12 miles from her launch point. Her equipment was intact, but the recording device was waterlogged, except for one file. That audio file lasts 4 seconds. A low, grinding hum, followed by what sounds like several wet footsteps receding into silence. No wildlife noises, no wind, just absence. By 1985, the Army Corps of Engineers issued a classified hazard abatement recommendation for Sector Echo 9. The language was clinical, but the implications were clear: no anchoring, no diving, no subsurface exploration. A coded map included in the memo listed Echo 9 as a Category V hazard, an internal label usually reserved for underwater munitions zones or unstable tectonic fissures. And yet, no mines had ever been dumped there. No seismic fault runs through that part of the lake. The hazard, it seems, was something else entirely. At the same time, local legends began to morph. Older lakeside residents, those who remembered the stories from their grandparents, began using a new name for the zone: the Bone Well. The term began appearing in graffiti under docks, scratched into the wood of park benches, etched into picnic tables with keys. One of the strangest instances came from a student art show at Northwestern University. A sculpture built from recovered driftwood and glass depicted a descending spiral of skeletal limbs submerged in lacquered resin. Its title, handwritten in ink along the base, read, "What Calls from the Stone Hole." The artist, 21-year-old Elaine Marks, claimed she had seen the image in a dream. She died that autumn, the cause listed as acute oxygen deprivation after a seizure while swimming. No medical history, No previous episodes. In 1986, a leaked internal memo from the National Weather Service suggested that the lake's thermocline had begun behaving erratically. Rather than forming one or two stable temperature bands, as was typical, Echo 9 showed signs of multiple inversion layers, shifting, compressing, sometimes collapsing within minutes. The effect, in layman's terms, was like a heartbeat made of water. Several marine biologists noted mass die-offs of local fish in the zone. No clear cause. Tissues showed signs of barotrauma, but no rapid ascents had occurred. It was as if pressure had changed around them instantaneously. The only known cause for that, outside of explosions, would be the displacement of immense volumes of water, far more than any submarine or vessel could produce. That same year, an engineer named Lyle Rennick, who had worked on sonar calibration for the DSV-4, wrote a letter to a friend in which he described a shape he believed existed at the bottom of the lake. He didn't call it a machine. He didn't call it an animal. He called it a sealed organ embedded in rock and still alive. He included a hand-drawn cross-section that looked like a cathedral submerged in sediment, with long vertical shafts and spined channels reaching into the bedrock. He wrote, "It hears through pressure. It thinks through density. It has waited." Within 2 months of sending that letter, Rennick was found dead in his bathtub, submerged in only 4 inches of water. The coroner listed the cause of death as drowning, but friends insisted he had a lifelong phobia of baths and never entered one without supervision. His apartment was locked from the inside. The government never issued a statement. But that fall, the Coast Guard quietly rerouted all lake navigation maps to shift Echo 9 from its former location to an expanded, restricted fishing zone. The explanation? Hazardous wreckage. No ship was ever recorded sinking there. No wreckage was ever recovered. Only the designation remained, quiet, bureaucratic, and final. And still, beneath it all, the lake moved. By 1987, a quiet but intense shift occurred in how federal agencies documented the region. The Geological Survey's annual water floor topography update omitted Sector Echo 9 entirely for the first time in 2 decades. The surrounding areas were mapped with precision, but a perfect circle, nearly 2 nautical miles in diameter, was simply left blank. When questioned in an internal briefing, a department geologist described it as a directive from above my clearance level. That geologist, Margaret Hensley, was later reassigned to a NOAA weather station in Alaska, despite having no background in meteorology. Her departure memo included a handwritten postscript, "Silence holds." At the same time, a strange trend emerged in mental health reports from surrounding counties. Psychiatrists began noting a rise in patients presenting with recurring dreams involving submersion, pressure, and dark corridors beneath the earth. Several patients used nearly identical language: stone lungs, the blood of still water, the echo gate. None of the patients knew one another. None had ever been diving. One child, age 8, drew a detailed crayon illustration of a diver standing on the lake floor, staring into what looked like a rib cage carved into rock. The child wrote one word at the top in shaky letters: "Listen." That drawing would later resurface in a classified behavioral study compiled by the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA. The study, marked Restricted Subconscious Signal Contamination, speculated that persistent dreams and compulsive water imagery could be symptoms of a non-cognitive signal transmission event. The implication, though never stated directly, was that something beneath the lake was radiating an influence, beyond language, beyond thought, a resonance of being. That same year, 2 researchers from the University of Michigan, Professors Halderman and Ngo, conducted a sonar survey of the deeper southern basins under a private academic grant. Their boat was outfitted with experimental low-frequency sonar designed for under-ice Antarctic mapping. What they recorded has since become the subject of intense online speculation, despite the university officially denouncing the data as compromised. The raw output, partially leaked in 1999, shows several concentric circles etched into the bed of Sector Echo 9, perfectly geometric, layered and pulsing with measurable shifts every 72 seconds. Ngo later described the readings as the closest thing to a breath I've ever seen underwater. The university revoked his tenure after he refused to recant that statement. Halderman, meanwhile, disappeared during a solo road trip to Denver. His car was found abandoned on a bridge near Muskegon. The trunk was filled with magnetic tape reels, most blank, one overwritten with a deep, repetitive chime. The tape has never been played publicly. Further complicating matters, a construction crew digging drainage near South Haven unearthed something they couldn't explain. 4 workers testified under oath that they struck a metal wall just 4 feet beneath the surface, smooth, curved, with a vibration that buzzed through the tools like a live wire. Before any formal excavation could begin, the site was cordoned off by men wearing unmarked uniforms. The crew was paid off and signed NDAs. But one of them, interviewed anonymously years later, said, "Whatever it wasn't buried. We were the ones that were exposed." In late 1988, a civilian diving team sponsored by a Chicago-based documentary startup applied for permits to explore rumored wreckage near Echo 9. The team consisted of 6 experienced divers and 2 camera operators. The footage they recorded has never been publicly released, and all 6 divers were declared missing after a violent storm supposedly swept the boat off course. But a private investigator hired by one of the families uncovered a single frame from a test roll, salvaged from a courier envelope intercepted at a damaged postal depot. The image shows a diver hovering near what looks like a vertical fissure in the lake floor. At first glance, it appears empty, but zoomed in, the darkness isn't uniform. A shape is barely visible, long, curved, rising from the trench like a spine. No one has ever authenticated the image, but metadata places it 3 hours before the team's last contact. Soon after, a Michigan senator quietly lobbied to increase Coast Guard presence in Lake Michigan, citing strategic waterway protection. The funding bill passed with no debate. Embedded within the fine print of the legislation was a clause allocating resources to long-term geosensory surveillance. When journalists attempted to investigate, access was denied on grounds of national waterway security. And so, a new wave of silence began, colder, harder, enforced not by secrecy, but by bureaucracy. Throughout 1989, a series of minor earthquakes, unusual for the region, rattled western Michigan. All were centered around the lake. All registered just strong enough to crack concrete and jolt seismometers, but not enough to justify alarm. One geologist noted that the tremors exhibited vertical displacement, more like something pushing up than shifting sideways. When asked during a conference what that could mean, he answered with a nervous laugh, "I don't know. Maybe the lake's breathing again." By the dawn of the 1990s, the story of Echo 9 had fractured into 2 realities. The public one, in which 4 Navy divers were lost to a training mishap, and the other, preserved only in whispers, in redacted files, in a scattered trail of nightmares and electromagnetic pulses. Beneath Lake Michigan, something remained, something not dead, not entirely asleep, not unaware of those who kept trying to find it. And slowly, those who had heard it once, through sonar, dream, vibration, or chance, began to feel it listening back. The early 1990s brought a shift, not in the lake itself, but in the people who had touched its mystery. Former sonar operators, divers, technicians, and researchers who had once worked near Echo 9 began to come forward in obscure publications, anonymous interviews, or encrypted internet forums just beginning to emerge on pre-web servers. They spoke cautiously, often in fragments, but the pattern was clear. Those who had come close, even peripherally, began to suffer. The symptoms weren't uniform. Some reported vivid auditory hallucinations, deep gurgling voices behind walls, or low rhythmic pulses felt in the jaw. Others suffered cognitive breakdowns. One technician who had worked in a NOAA sonar lab for years was institutionalized after he began compulsively drawing spirals on every surface, muttering the same phrase, "Down is listening now." A diver who had worked search and rescue near Echo 9 in 1983 took his own life after carving a series of overlapping wave patterns into his garage walls, each accompanied by what investigators believed to be phonetic representations of an unknown language. The carvings were precise, deliberate, and consistent, matching no known alphabet, yet recurring across multiple sources. Linguists who reviewed the patterns privately suggested the possibility of neurolinguistic contamination, a term they admitted had no real precedent. In 1991, a brief article appeared in the Journal of Comparative Mythology detailing similarities between Great Lakes folklore and Mesopotamian abyss myths, particularly the tale of Abzu, the primordial freshwater deep. The author, Dr. Isaac Okwari, proposed that inland bodies of water may have historically served as ritual centers not only because of their resource value, but due to a subperceptual pressure field that induced visions, dreams, or altered states. He cited ancient burial mounds in Ohio, submerged stone rings off the coast of Japan, and deep sonar anomalies in Lake Superior. One of the footnotes included the only known academic reference to Echo 9. It read simply, "Unexplained frequency spike, Lake Michigan, 1982, resonant anomaly." The paper was retracted within 3 weeks. Okwari resigned from his position shortly afterward and relocated to Botswana. His current whereabouts remain unknown. Meanwhile, the United States Geological Survey updated its magnetic anomaly maps for the Great Lakes. Though intended for mineral prospecting, the survey revealed an irregularity near the Echo 9 region. Most of the lake bed showed standard readings, with minor interference from ancient volcanic deposits. But one circular zone produced irregular magnetotelluric readings, as if something beneath the surface was not only magnetic, but reactive. The anomaly emitted brief pulses of radiation on frequencies typical of high-energy particle accelerators, except no such installations existed anywhere nearby. The map containing this data was quietly removed from the USGS archives within months. In 1993, a low-profile case was filed in federal court. Rogers v. United States Navy *. The plaintiff, a former contractor who claimed he had been exposed to non-standard environmental stressors during a sonar calibration exercise in 1982, sought compensation for severe neurological damage. His statements were rambling and disjointed. He described seeing fractures in the water, hearing a voice in a bubble that didn't pop, and feeling as if his thoughts had been rewritten with lake script. The court dismissed the case as baseless, and all records were sealed. But transcripts of the hearing leaked years later, and include one peculiar exchange in which Rogers was asked what he thought lived at the bottom of the lake. His answer, "It doesn't live. It remembers." The phrase began circulating among fringe theorists and esoteric researchers online. Forums began to light up with claims about the Watcher in the Shallows, the Echo Womb, and a term that hadn't been seen before, the Sunk Cathedral. Some believed it was a biological organism, others an ancient machine. But all agreed on one thing. Whatever it was not passive. It was not inert. It responded. A strange event occurred in late 1994. Amateur satellite enthusiasts monitoring weather imaging noticed a sudden burst of heat radiating from Lake Michigan near Sector Echo 9. It lasted only 22 seconds. The source appeared as a concentric ring of elevated temperature, expanding outward in near-perfect symmetry. Official explanations referenced anomalous reflection patterning from solar flare activity. But this event occurred at 2:47 a.m. local time, under full cloud cover. No solar activity was recorded that day. 2 days later, 3 different weather buoys in the lake reported a vertical water displacement exceeding 6 meters, an impossible figure for calm conditions. And on the same night, residents along the western shore reported a low-frequency hum that rattled windows but could not be traced. Police dispatched logs from Holland. Michigan recorded 9 separate calls describing a whale noise coming from the earth. The following spring, the Coast Guard began issuing restricted navigation warnings for Echo 9 during high tide cycles. These were explained as routine adjustments, but internal memos from that period mention elevated field interference and recommend that all naval transmissions reroute signals away from the sector during the window. An attached map shows an elliptical shape growing slowly outward from the central point over time, as if something below was swelling. From 1995 to 1996, lake-related disappearances spiked along the southern basin. Most were attributed to winter ice or storm activity, but several occurred in clear daylight under ideal conditions. In each case, witnesses described the water going still before the incident. One boat captain, who lost a passenger during a leisure cruise, told investigators that it felt like the lake stopped pretending it was water. The phrase made it into the official report, then was redacted in every public copy. And finally, in September of 1996, a declassified satellite document from a Russian intelligence agency made a quiet appearance online. It included a single photo taken from a now-defunct reconnaissance satellite of Lake Michigan under infrared sweep. At the center of the image, beneath the surface, was a structure, round, multi-layered, too symmetrical to be rock. The label in Cyrillic reads, Objekt ne ustanovlen, predpoložitelno rukotvorny. Translation: Object unidentified, presumed artificial. The file was pulled within hours. The user who posted it never surfaced again, and somewhere beneath the waves, the breath held. For now. In the winter of 1997, an emergency maintenance alert was issued to a satellite relay facility outside Madison, Wisconsin. The alert originated from an automated relay ping in the underwater acoustic sensor network maintained quietly by the Navy and NOAA for submarine detection across the Great Lakes. This system, officially referred to as LANS, Lake Acoustic Net Surveillance, was never publicly acknowledged, but internal documents show it as operational since 1981, with its deepest node located directly within Echo 9. The alert wasn't triggered by signal loss or damage. It was caused by a signal loop. A repeating fragment, 13 seconds in length, sent back through the network not from another relay point, but from the deep itself. The loop contained no recognizable language, but its waveform mirrored a human vocal signature, female, mid-range, whispering. Forensic analysis later suggested the pattern bore similarities to laryngeal vibrations, but with impossible modulation depth. The internal review team assigned to the incident labeled it false echo recurrence, though one note in the margins of their final report reads, "It's not bouncing back, it's answering." That same month, a former naval chaplain named Errol McCrae posted a short personal essay to an obscure online theology forum. He described a confession he'd received in 1983 from a drowning survivor, an unnamed sonar officer pulled from Lake Michigan after his boat capsized under clear skies. According to McCrae, the man had screamed upon waking, wept during the session, and described being held in the water by something that had no hands, just pressure. The man claimed he didn't breathe but remembered the shape of breathing, and that while submerged, he felt his own thoughts being weighed. McCrae's post ended with a passage he claimed came directly from the man's mouth. "It watches from below like we watch stars, only we shine, and it sinks." 2 weeks after publishing the post, McCrae suffered a stroke and passed away. The forum entry was deleted by moderators, citing disturbing content, but archived versions survive. When researchers later attempted to verify the identity of the drowning survivor, no matching incident was found in any Coast Guard or Navy record for that year. In the spring of 1998, a Canadian hydrologist working on a cross-border water clarity project published an innocuous paper about sub-lacustrine sediment rings near the American coastline. Among the data points was a sonar reading he identified as false bedrock near the Echo 9 region, a zone where the bottom appeared to recede under repeat scans. He noted that the surface dropped an additional 6 meters across a 2-week period, then returned to its original depth. This could not be explained by shifting sediment or temperature. The anomaly was flagged by U.S. intelligence partners, and the paper was retracted due to inconsistent data handling. The hydrologist Jean-Louis Tardif later refused all contact and moved to Martinique. Yet beneath these fragmented events, something larger was quietly taking form. In 1999, a covert interagency working group was formed under the Department of Defense and Department of Energy. Codenamed Night Vault, its stated mission was subsurface resonance classification and non-geological signature mapping. Membership included engineers, linguists, physicists, and one folklorist. Though the group's records remain classified, a leaked travel log from a civilian contractor reveals 4 in-person meetings held in rural Michigan between 1999 and 2001, always within 20 miles of Lake Michigan. One meeting was scheduled at an abandoned Cold War-era radar station. The notes from that session included a strange diagram, a helix coiled into a circle with a single note beneath. Harmonics repeat until answered. During the same period, fishermen along the eastern lake shore began reporting a sound they could not place, not a boat motor, not an animal. A low melodic chime heard under the hull at night, always in the same 5-tone pattern. Recordings exist, though none are consistent. In some, the tones ascend. In others, they descend. One particularly clear recording made it into the hands of a marine acoustician at the University of Chicago, who ran the audio through a frequency dissection algorithm. What he found disturbed him enough to quietly resign the following year. In a private email recovered from his account after his death, he wrote, "They are not just tones, they're responses. They shift when we change." By the early 2000s, weather patterns around the lake began exhibiting anomalies, not in temperature or precipitation, but in barometric pressure, which dipped without warning near the Echo 9 sector, forming what meteorologists referred to as microgravity depressions. These pockets lasted minutes, sometimes hours, but consistently disrupted avian flight paths and produced brief radar shadows in the lower atmosphere. In one internal NWS bulletin, a senior meteorologist suggested that something below is displacing pressure without volume, an atmospheric impossibility. The memo was not distributed beyond the internal network, but a small red note at the bottom reads, "Include in Night Vault?" The same year, a freelance geologist discovered crystalline formations washed up along the coast near Bridgman. These were not salt, quartz, or ice. They resembled hexagonal tubes, translucent, with faint internal filaments, structures that glowed briefly when placed near electromagnetic sources. Tests performed in private labs indicated an unknown composite material with layered silica and carbon chains interlaced in fractal patterns. Within weeks, all samples were confiscated under a mineral rights dispute. The geologist, Marianne Glosser, left the field and reportedly lives off-grid. And finally, in October 2001, a major blackout struck portions of western Michigan. Officially caused by a substation failure, the event lasted less than 4 minutes. But in that window, every underwater hydrophone in Echo 9 recorded the same event. A spike, not electrical, vibrational, measured at 6.2 on the Richter scale, centered not in the crust, but in the water. The shock wave traveled outward, weakening gradually. For those 4 minutes, the lake moved, not with waves, but with rhythm. Then it stopped, and silence returned. But beneath that silence, a deeper question was beginning to surface. What exactly had been waiting below? And had it always been there? Or had something woken it up? In early 2002, a memo circulated quietly within the Department of Homeland Security, then, in its infancy following the September 11th attacks, marked with the classification, Emerging Domestic Anomaly, Aquatic Category. The memo was never meant for public eyes. It originated from a joint subcommittee interfacing with environmental monitoring, infrastructure resilience, and military hydrology. While the rest of the nation scrambled to defend airports and borders, a small, insulated group reviewed a different kind of threat assessment. The document detailed 12 unexplained aquatic events across the U.S. over the prior decade. 11 were attributed to tectonics, industrial mishaps, or statistical aberration. Only one was left uncategorized, Echo 9. The report concluded with an unsettling recommendation: indefinite non-interference advised unless emergent surface breach observed. That phrase, surface breach, had not been used in any internal reports prior to 2001, but in retrospect it had been quietly encoded for years. NOAA logs from as far back as 1987 referenced recurrent upwelling, inversion layers behaving with inverted density, and pseudo-venting behavior. These were all polite euphemisms for the same unknown. Something down there was pressing upward, cycling through a kind of activity that did not match geological norms. It did not erupt. It swelled, then calmed, breathed in, then exhaled weeks later, always just enough to reset the sensors, never enough to confirm. In July of that year, a team of private divers hired by a television production company specializing in mystery lakes of North America attempted a deep dive several miles southeast of Echo 9, aiming to stay outside the restricted perimeter. Their boat, the Mirabel Asterisk, lost radio contact during routine descent procedures. When contact was restored 28 minutes later, only the 2 topside crew remained. The divers never resurfaced. The crew reported sudden clouding of the water, compass failure, and a repeating clicking sound from below the hull, like teeth chattering in metal. The show was canceled before production resumed. The surviving footage, only seconds long, shows a diver's wrist camera trembling in pitch darkness. The last frame before it cut to static is unclear, but frame enhancement reveals something pale and ridged moving past the lens, not swimming, sliding. Later that year, a FOIA request filed by a retired naval analyst inadvertently revealed a procurement contract between the Department of Defense and a subcontractor specializing in non-invasive bathymetric perimeter netting. The contract described the installation of synthetic acoustic curtains tethered at multiple depth levels around a 3-mile radius in the southern basin of Lake Michigan. No such technology had been deployed publicly at the time. The application, passive containment. The implication, not to keep intruders out, but to keep something in. In December, strange reports came from shoreline patrols at Indiana Dunes. Rangers described finding entire sections of beach coated in a thick silt unlike anything they'd seen before, fine, oily, and warm to the touch. Tests showed it contained no pollutants, no biological matter, but bore crystalline structures similar to those found in the earlier Bridgman samples. One ranger, who collected a jar without authorization, reportedly suffered auditory hallucinations within a week, mostly low murmurs and wet ticking. He resigned soon after and submitted himself voluntarily for psychological evaluation, claiming, "The lake keeps whispering, not words, just wait." Throughout 2003, an increase in electrical disturbances was reported by boaters and marina operators along the southern edge of the lake. Generators sputtered, batteries drained without cause. Several GPS devices refused to lock. These incidents never made major news, explained away as magnetic interference or faulty maintenance. But internal records from marine insurance claims tell a different story. A peculiar pattern emerged, compasses deviating not randomly, but toward a fixed point offshore, always slightly west of Sector Echo 9. In one case, a ship's compass reportedly began spinning slowly clockwise while stationary, as if pulled by a moving field beneath the hull. Around this time, the phrase, "the Black Pulse," began appearing on fringe forums frequented by amateur cryptographers, conspiracy researchers, and electronic surveillance hobbyists. The term referred to a recurring waveform that disrupted certain naval communications between 3 and 4 a.m. EST in short bursts, lasting between 7 and 9 seconds. The waveform was detected sporadically across several states, always stronger near the lake. What made it terrifying wasn't its power, but its precision. It arrived at the same minute across different systems hundreds of miles apart. It didn't cause interference. It replaced signals. Some believed it was the lake speaking in data. Others feared it was something learning to mimic the machines listening to it. One technician claimed the Black Pulse wasn't noise, but signal. When run through an oscilloscope and mirrored, the waveform produced a pattern eerily similar to a vertebral column. He joked that the lake was growing a spine. Within weeks, his workstation was seized by Homeland Security on the grounds of unauthorized signal analysis of protected infrastructure. No such law existed. In April 2004, seismic sensors along the western Michigan coast recorded a deep, singular tremor. Not large, barely measurable, but unlike any recorded prior. It did not match fault lines or industrial detonation profiles. The waveform resembled a heartbeat just once, then silence. Later reviews showed that lake sensors captured a strange acoustic echo milliseconds afterward, traveling in a downward path, as if something below had answered. And then, for almost a year, nothing. No pulses, no tremors, no compass spins, just silence. Some believed the mystery had passed, but those watching closely knew better. The silence wasn't absence, it was waiting. The silence ended on the night of March 23, 2005. At 2:14 a.m., a Canadian weather satellite captured an unusual thermal bloom rising from the center of Lake Michigan, directly over Sector Echo 9. Unlike previous anomalies, this was not subtle. The bloom spread rapidly, forming a perfect radial gradient nearly 4 miles wide. The temperature differential was measured at nearly 18 degrees Celsius above surrounding waters, without any corresponding atmospheric shift. The image was never publicly released. It appeared in a technical dispatch from the Canadian Meteorological Centre under the title Unidentified Subsurface Thermal Venting. The note at the bottom, redacted in most versions, reportedly read, "Confirm with American partners. Possible breach? The same night, motion sensors at 3 separate Coast Guard stations along the lake's southern edge triggered within seconds of one another, each detecting waves that moved not outward from the shore, but toward it. The sensors were recalibrated and tested for faults. None were found. Yet the lake remained calm to the naked eye. The waves had not broken the surface. They had moved below it, silently, with force. In the days that followed, reports began trickling in. A pair of night fishermen near St. Joseph swore the water hummed under the boat like an engine with no propeller. A retired geophysicist walking her dog along the beach claimed to have seen lines in the water, glowing faintly beneath the surface in perfect symmetry, like a submerged cathedral floor. Most of the accounts were written off, but 2 divers, privately contracted to inspect a collapsed drainage system off the coast, never came back up. Their safety line was retracted intact, with the tension clip cleanly snapped as if sheared by pressure. By April, the Night Vault group had reconvened. Internal correspondences from the Department of Energy revealed a renewed urgency. Phase shift, unconfirmed. Persistence conditions met. Observer effect active. These phrases, never defined in any official document, became central to the theory surrounding what many now believed was not a thing sleeping under the lake, but an intelligence, something vast, unfixed in shape, but coherent. Not dormant, only slow, something that did not awaken in our time, something that waited for time to come back around. Weeks later, an encrypted hard drive was anonymously mailed to a civilian academic known for his work in underwater resonance patterns. On it was a single file, audio recorded on a private hydrophone near Echo 9. The waveform defied known behavior, nested pulses layered across separate frequencies, like a song trying to harmonize with itself from different points in space. When slowed down, some believed they could hear a word, or the shadow of one, repeating under the bass thrum. The closest transliteration was asterisk ubis asterisk, an ancient proto-root for where in several dead languages. Others said it wasn't a word at all, but a beacon. A question sent into the dark, waiting for the right ear to hear. That summer, an unexpected update was made to the U.S. Geological Survey's online map of Lake Michigan. A small white circle appeared near the Echo 9 coordinates, marked Pending Review. It stayed for 2 weeks before disappearing. No explanation was provided, but those watching the server logs noted that the file was accessed more than 1,600 times by agencies tagged DHS, DoD, and US Stratcom, none of which had any stated jurisdiction over environmental mapping. In July, the town of Bridgman experienced a localized blackout. It lasted only 6 minutes, but during that window, several homes reported strange electronic behavior. Old televisions powered on without being plugged in. Radios played static patterns that changed pitch when approached. One woman claimed her child's baby monitor picked up whispers in the bathtub. When reviewed by local technicians, the devices showed no fault. One of them, a retired Navy electronics expert, quit the job halfway through and moved out of state. He left behind a single note: "Don't listen with machines. It hears us hearing." In early autumn, an unregistered vessel appeared on radar west of South Haven. It matched no known maritime registry. Coast Guard interception was attempted, but by the time they arrived, the ship was gone. Divers sent to investigate found the water oddly warm and faintly lit below the surface, like a ceiling of glowing mist. Samples taken from the area showed elevated levels of trace elements not normally found in freshwater: manganese, molybdenum, and a compound not yet cataloged, containing a lattice structure that pulsed faintly under electron microscopy. 3 weeks later, a massive dead zone formed beneath the surface near Echo 9. Fish fled. Birds stopped flying over the area. Even algae failed to grow. The sonar reflection from the lake floor ceased, not slowed, not distorted, ceased. It was as if the lake had opened its mouth and let sound fall in. That winter, a retired linguist who had once consulted on the Night Vault project published a limited-run book privately titled Asterisk, the Harmonic Abyss Asterisk. Only 17 copies were printed before the author was hospitalized for a psychotic episode. In it, he posits that certain arrangements of underwater pressure, sound, and mineral geometry form a kind of latent grammar, a syntax not of speech, but of presence. He speculates that Echo 9 may be not just a place, but a sentential architecture, a structure that isn't built but spoken into shape by something that does not speak the way we understand. The final sentence of the book reads, "It is not sleeping, it is composing." By 2006, the name Echo 9 had vanished from nearly every public source. Sonar maps had been scrubbed. Academic mentions were retracted. Even the fishermen stopped pointing to the spot. It wasn't fear, it was erosion. The memory itself was dissolving, almost as if whatever had once weighted down there had shifted its reach, not outward, but upward, and the silence returned once more. But this time, it felt different. It didn't feel like waiting. It felt like listening. In the spring of 2007, a low-resolution satellite image began to circulate on a restricted message board used by retired naval contractors and civilian oceanographers. The image, taken by a foreign Earth monitoring satellite, showed Lake Michigan under full cloud cover, except for one anomaly. A single, near-perfect spiral pattern visible on the water's surface centered precisely over the region once designated Echo 9. No storm was present. No current could have produced such geometry. The image was removed within 40 minutes. The poster's account was deleted. But before it vanished, one user managed to archive the image. When enhanced, the spiral appeared to be made not of waves or foam, but concentric dimples, pressure points etched gently into the surface, like something beneath had exhaled upward in slow precision. That same month, multiple seismographs across the American Midwest registered a brief but coordinated series of tremors. They were not strong, barely perceptible, but their signatures were identical, rippling outward from beneath the lake. More alarmingly, they didn't occur at the same time, but in precise sequential intervals, moving from north to south like a wave crawling along the spine of the land. One USGS analyst described the behavior as biomechanical pacing. He was later removed from the project. 3 weeks later, the last confirmed sighting occurred. A flight from Chicago to Detroit deviated slightly from its intended path due to weather. The pilot, an Air Force veteran with over 10,000 hours in the cockpit, radioed in a visual report at 22,000 feet. His exact words were recorded in the tower log. "There's something forming, not clouds. It's like shadow in the water, moving opposite the wind." When pressed, he described a shape just beneath the surface, vast, slow turning, with geometry that felt impossible to look at all at once. He described it as not big like a ship, big like a thought. He requested an immediate altitude change. By the time the satellite was repositioned, nothing remained. The FAA dismissed the event as optical refraction. The pilot resigned within the year. From that moment forward, no new incidents were officially recorded, no sightings, no seismic pulses, no strange dreams logged. It was as if the lake had gone dead. But those closest to the story, those who'd been tracking it since the first whispers in 1982, knew better. The silence was not absence, it was a seal, a final phase in whatever had begun decades earlier beneath the surface. In 2008, the Echo 9 designation was officially removed from all internal navigation systems. No memo announced it. No decommissioning ceremony occurred. It was replaced with a generic depth marker and a note reading unsurveyable terrain. Coast Guard vessels no longer entered the radius without written authorization. Private marinas began receiving quiet incentives to redirect traffic southward. Even recreational fishing maps blurred the coordinates, citing ecological sensitivity. In 2009, a declassified Department of Energy internal report, almost entirely redacted, contained a single legible line. Whatever it wasn't reaching upward. We were leaning down. By 2010, most of the researchers who had touched Echo 9 were gone, retired, transferred, lost to illness or silence. Some, like Halderman, Ngo, Glosser, and McCrae, became names spoken in half-finished conversations, stories passed like ghost maps through bars and back-end servers. Night Vault was shuttered quietly. The last document it ever issued, leaked in 2014, bore only a single symbol, a spiral formed of 13 curved lines. Beneath it, one phrase, "Do not complete the pattern." And so, Lake Michigan remains, cold, vast, innocent to the passing eye. Tourists walk its shores. Boats pass without thought. Children swim above depths that once flickered with shape. But in that place, beneath the sediment, the water, the pressure, the forgotten coordinates, something still rests, or composes, or thinks, not with mind or muscle, but with shape, with vibration, with patience. The four divers never came back. Their story was buried, their names unspoken. But if you know where to stand on the shore at midnight, if the lake is still enough, if the wind dies completely and the stars flicker just once, you might feel it. Not a sound, not a vision, but a pressure behind your heart, like being watched by something ancient and slow, something too vast to fit inside your skull. And if you do, don't look down, don't lean closer, don't complete the pattern.